Coronavirus stuff goes on, doesn't it? You are writing to me in droves, all saying the same thing. Stop. All this coronavirus stuff goes on, doesn't it? You are writing to me in droves, all saying the same thing. Stop talking about the number of people who test positive. Tell us how many you've tested. What percentage have tested positive? How many cases are critical? What are the ages of these people? What pre-existing conditions do the people have who've been admitted to hospital? How many cases are mild? How many have recovered? We're sick of the headlines. A registered nurse for over 30 years has written to me to say in desperation this is government terrorism, medical terrorism and media terrorism. They're genuinely and legitimately worried. Victorians are being told they could face restrictions until Christmas, as the Andrews government can't differentiate between those who test positive and those who are at risk. Now, if no one else makes the point, I have to. Peter Dunn tested positive. A few months ago, a young bloke who works for me tested positive. You're not about to dive into a coffin if you test positive. And yet here we are, not 6 months on, being told we've got to climb an economic mountain. We didn't create the mountain. This was created by politicians and bureaucrats who have not forfeited a cent. And now the Federal Treasurer tells us we're facing a set of eye-watering figures, eye-watering indeed. A budget deficit of about $300 billion, gross debt heading to $1 trillion. It's enough to make you vomit. Tony Abbott made the point as to what should have underpinned all of our responses to the coronavirus crisis, namely the extent to which saving lives should or should not take precedence over preserving the economy. Who's worried about the young people, 15 to 24? The Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe rightly says that young people have disproportionately borne the job losses and associated mental health pressures. What is the cost of that for the nation? Young people are heavily represented in things like hospitality, recreation, retail and the arts, while in no way minimising the loss of employment that has occurred across all age groups. For younger Australians, the crisis comes when they're transitioning from study to work. They've got no on-the-job experience. They most probably have HECS debt. They may well be paying rent. The prospects of ever owning a home are non-existent, and financial pressures cause mental health issues. So does social isolation. Then we're told the pressure on the banks will intensify because a UBS analyst reported on Monday many small businesses will fold during 2021 when the stimulus is removed. What the hell does that do to our unemployment and economic growth? Deloitte Access Economics said earlier this week that almost 10% of the nation's businesses were at, quote, high risk of failure come September. Now, governments have been long warned these would be the consequences. I'm not being wise after the event, but way back in April, I drew attention to the comments of Professor John Ioannidis, the Professor of Medicine and Professor of Epidemiology and Population Health at Stanford University School of Medicine. Would he know something? He made the point very early on, and I quote, if we'd not known about a new virus out there and had not checked individuals with PCR tests, the number of total deaths due to quote-unquote influenza-like illness would not have seemed unusual this year. At most, we might have casually noted that flu this season seems a bit worse than average. The media coverage, he wrote, would have been less than for an NBA game between the two most indifferent teams, unquote. Well, no one bothered to listen to him. They picked their own experts, advocating massive lockdowns and now this economic trillion-dollar mess. We've got 625,000 deaths from coronavirus around the world as at today. But the deaths so far this year from communicable diseases around the world are 7.2 million. The deaths from cancer are 4.5 million. The deaths caused by smoking are 2.7 million. We have, Australia, 172 people in hospital, 165 in Victoria. We've got 42 in intensive care, 40 of them are in Victoria. Is this a pandemic or an exercise in gross irresponsibility by the Victorian government? I said earlier this week, and I repeat it, why doesn't someone tell us whether the aim of the exercise is to reduce all risk to zero? So do we stop people from driving cars or motorcycles? Do we stop someone having a child or climbing a mountain or jumping off a cliff into the water? Everyone in a face mask, everyone to be tested, everyone to be frightened out of their wits. Scott Morrison says the Australian economy is fighting back. Well, I suppose he's got to accentuate the positives, but tell that to the tourism sector. They say unless they get extended JobKeeper for 6 months, Tens of thousands of jobs are gone. Victoria are now costing the tourism industry $146 million a week. The sector has lost $6 billion in 3 months. The construction sector, the home always of productivity and jobs, is set to lose about 140,000 jobs over the next 2 years. The building labour force faces an 18% contraction. These are staggering figures. JobKeeper can't go on forever. What is at the end of the road? All the government estimates this week say that business will have a rapid bounce back. Well, I hope so. What do you think? I'll tell you what you'd be entitled to think. With militant protests on the street, monuments and statues being knocked down, freedom of speech being destroyed, people terrified to speak out, unhinged, snarling human pit bulls frightening the tripe out of people. Metaphor of all of this are the persistent attacks directed towards Donald Trump, a democratically elected president, and now a virus ripping the guts out of the economy. You'd be entitled to think there's an agenda out there, comprehensively determined to destroy Western society as we know it.